In a career spanning global markets, bold pivots, and breakthrough technologies, Rob Thomas has learned what it truly takes to lead transformation. As IBM's Senior Vice President of Software and Chief Commercial Officer, Rob oversees one of the world's largest enterprise software portfolios, helping clients turn AI, data, and automation into measurable business impact. In this episode, he reflects on the defining inflection points that shaped his career and why drive, curiosity, and an insatiable love of reading have been his greatest catalysts for growth and innovation. Rob also unpacks what distinguishes companies that say they're AI first from those actually delivering results and how leaders can bridge that gap. Here's my conversation with IBM's Rob Thomas on leadership, learning, and what it takes to build an AI-first business that's truly future-ready.
Are you ready to nurture what's next? Reimagine industries to turn bold ambition into the beginning of everything. What's your next brilliant move? McKinsey & Company.
Rob Thomas, Senior Vice President of Software and Chief Commercial Officer at IBM. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here at Fortune Next Lead.
Ruth, great to be with you. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, let's delve first into your career and leadership ascension. You spent more than 2 decades at IBM, rising through microelectronics, consulting, now global software and sales. What's helped you make that progression from someone who was a technical operator to now someone who is this enterprise scaled leader?
IBM is an amazing company where you can be here for 20 plus years and do a lot of different roles. I joined IBM in consulting. I don't really know much about consulting, so I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I go out and just start meeting with clients. And apparently the official way to do an IBM was to wait for somebody to invite you to go to a client. But I just go start meeting with clients. I remember it well, like my manager at the time calls me in and they're like, you really shouldn't be out meeting with clients. And I was like, I have respect for authority. So I was like, okay. But then I was thinking about it like over the next week. I was like, I'm not sure that person's right. But the reason that stuck with me is like, I kind of keep doing that. And then other people start coming to me like, hey, we heard you're at that client. We heard you did something great. We want to come along. And you just realize in a big company, sometimes well-intended rules or directions get misinterpreted. So I don't think that person was wrong in terms of what they were trying to convey, but it also led me to always realize that we exist because there are clients. And you really can't go wrong ever working with clients. So then I kind of parlay that into, I end up in microelectronics. I didn't know much about that, so I had to learn a lot about it. And then at one point ended up in Japan. And then when I moved back to the US, I ended up in software, ended up running software engineering. So I've always been, I'd say, curious and open-minded to try completely new things, but knowing that on day one, when you're trying something new, you're going to know nothing about it. So you have to have the humility to say, maybe I can figure it out. And that takes a little time to get comfortable with that.
So it seems that every role you pivoted to your point, you knew very little about. Was it naivete, which can be useful? Was it drive? Was it something else?
Probably a little naivete. A lot of drive. I guess I've always been interested in challenging myself. And I think it was a Vince Lombardi quote where he said, we will aspire for perfection, knowing it's not possible, but along the way, maybe we can achieve excellence. And I'm just driven by, like, I want to do interesting things and try to do them in a very high quality way. And that means you've got to be open-minded to trying different things, new approaches. I read a ton. And that doesn't make me an expert, but then you kind of figure out what works. And then you talk to a bunch of people that have been in the field for a while. And I think over time, I really encourage people when I'm mentoring them or talking to them, like, be comfortable getting outside of what you would typically want to do or decide to do, because I think you will grow as a result of that.
As you look back, was there a defining project, a challenge, or even a mentor that truly transformed how you lead or even how you think about leadership?
I'll give you one story from when I was in Japan, because I showed up in Japan. I'd spent a summer there when I was in college. So I had some familiarity, but Japan is unlike anywhere in the world.
In what
So,
way?
first of all, the people are incredibly kind, but they're also not very open. So you have to earn everything that you do there, because they're not going to just tell you what's on their mind. So you have to make people comfortable. So it teaches you, I would say, new leadership lessons. But I remember I get there, so I'm going over there to run microelectronics and services that we're doing around high tech. So you're imagining, all right, so we're going to be working on the leading things that's happening in technology in the world. And the first thing I come across is a team at IBM that's working on a pachinko machine. If you don't know what pachinko is, it's basically the cross between like a pinball machine and a slot machine. And I'm like, and it's all mechanical. So I'm like thinking like, what are we doing? Why are we working on pachinko machines? Like I thought we were going to be designing semiconductors and doing embedded software. And to the credit of our team, they saw a customer that was struggling. They were trying to make the transition from physical to digital, and they thought they could help. And I think my initial instinct, which would probably be anybody's, is like, we shouldn't be doing this. This is not the business that we're in. But I think if you're open-minded to maybe the teams closest to the ground have the best ideas, then you can kind of let it go a little bit. I think it was actually the founder of Toyota had a quote where it was something to the matter of, he used the word Gemba, Gemba, and he said, the truth lies on the factory floor. And his point was that the truth of what customers need or what the business should be doing is the closest possible to where the action is. It's not in the C-suite. And so I looked at that example. I was like, well, maybe we should let that go. And we kept building on it. And then we ended up doing stuff in printing and in digital cameras. And that leads us down the path of gaming. And so if we hadn't allowed that flower to blossom, if you will, I'm not sure we would have gotten the business to where it was. And that was a pretty enduring lesson to me of just about, maybe the secret is on the factory floor.
I want to talk about leading at scale. You now oversee IBM software division, also its global commercial organization, which is kind of this rare combination of product and profit responsibility. I think at most companies, they split those functions. One leader handles product, another handles sales. How do you align IBM software teams with sales, with profit goals without stifling creativity and without stifling innovation?
It's difficult for sure because there's a balance, because to some extent on the commercial side, everything's focused on the short term. And on the R&D side, the product side, actually everything's focused on, I'll call it the medium to long term, because uh, nothing gets built overnight. And so I think that's part of the balance is how do you shift gears between those two modes, depending on the meeting that you're in or the time of the quarter or the time of the year, whatever it may be. I do think I've discovered why many large companies struggle to innovate. And it comes down to one word, which is iteration. Large companies typically have long planning processes. They want to make big bets. And that's the opposite of iteration. Because when you're iterating, you're doing a little bit, you're trying, you're getting feedback, and then you're adjusting. And that's not really the culture of most large companies. And I think having the combination of both roles has probably forced me to see that. I remember a discussion I had. Well, we acquired a company by the name of Netiza a number of years back, and the founder, incredible person, his name is Jet Saxena, and Jet founded a bunch of companies. And when he retired, he started doing angel investing. And I remember him telling me one time, he said, when I invest in a company, I try to meet with them every month, and I just want to see. All I ask them is, what are the customers telling you? And he said, they come in, they tell me what happened. I listen, say, well, if they said that, maybe you should go do that. If they said that, maybe you should go do that. And he said, every month, when you do this over 3 years, we're doing a dramatically different thing 1 year from now than what we were doing at the start. But that's actually what leads you to a great product. That's what enables you to innovate. And when I heard him telling that story, I was like, we don't do that at all in IBM. Like, we're like, we're deciding to build this. Now we will build this. It will come in 2 years. It will arrive. And so to me, that was the sign, like we have to completely change how we're innovating. And now we try to be much more iterative in how we're doing this. Build a little, test a little, learn a lot as we're going. And I think our products are a lot better because of it.
How do you change that culture, especially at an organization that's as sprawling as IBM, where, there's one set of thinking that is so deeply entrenched within the system and has been for a long time? And it certainly sounds easier said than done.
It is. I think back to my comment of the secret lies on the factory floor. What I've noticed in IBM, and I think it's true in every big company, there are people in the organization who know the right thing to do. It is our job as a leadership team to find them and to elevate them. And they tend to be people that break a lot of glass, if I can use that term, meaning they have a strong view of what we should be doing. They don't want to follow all the normal processes. They tend to be louder. Maybe they're slightly more disagreeable than others. But I think part of our job is to encourage that. Now, you don't want to go to the point of it's disrespectful or it's creating so much, confrontation that the company can't function. I think we're a long way from anything like that. But I think you have to encourage people that want to stick their neck out a little bit because that is the best way to change culture.
You said previously that operational excellence is often what separates good leaders from great leaders. I think a lot of leaders are great at setting strategy, they can be great visionaries, but much fewer are able to actually execute. So, how do you do that at a place like IBM, which, as I already alluded to, is quite huge?
I like to write a lot, and I'll send out something every Monday to a number of people in the company. Maybe once or twice a year, I'll write something longer form. It's kind of my ways of getting my ideas out of my head. And I think the reason that can be helpful is it helps the people around me know, like, what should we be focused on? What are the priorities? Kind of back to my story from early days in IBM. If people lose the plot on the direction, that actually slows down execution. So I think leaders have to find different ways to communicate. I like to write. I do some in
How
video.
long are we talking? Not a
So
PhD thesis, but
no, I mean, if I'm doing the 2 or 3 times a year is 4 to 7 pages, just white paper form. And what I write every Monday is typically like a snippet in email. What I told the sales team when I started doing that was, "You won't have to click on anything. It will just be there." It could be something I did the week before, something I'm thinking about. It's just a way to kinda keep everybody on the same page. So, those are very short. Like, I want that to be consumable on a phone, and make it easy. But I think just communicating consistently is really important in leadership. Now to your question on operations, I I like to study how other people have worked. You look at history. John Rockefeller had a really interesting insight, and I think it was eventually coined as the Rockefeller habits. And his point was you only need three things to drive execution. You need priorities, you need data, and you need rhythm. What does that mean? Priorities means we all know what's important. There's 100 things we could be doing, but there's 3 to 5 that matter. So you have to be clear on the priorities. Data means we have a way to measure, are we making progress on the priorities or not? Just data. Either we are or we aren't, and if we're not, then we know how to adjust. And rhythm is the point of you need some consistent approach to how you're going to check on progress on the priorities. What does the data say? And what I've seen in, I think, organizations or teams that struggle is the rhythm's all over the place. It's like if something's wrong, call a meeting, as opposed to, we have a consistency to the rhythm. I see the people that make up their own data. That's not very useful. Or I see the priorities change constantly.
you write a newsletter, The Mentor, and often talk about leadership development. You share your own personal musings. What skills or mindsets do you believe every aspiring CEO, every aspiring C-suite executive more broadly should cultivate earlier in their career? What do you wish you'd cultivated earlier in your career?
I think the biggest habit somebody can cultivate early in their career is probably one of the least popular things right now, which is reading. Like, are you really willing to block time on your calendar to read, study, go down different rabbit holes? A lot of people don't do that because everybody's so busy, they kind of jump from one thing to the other. That's number one. Two is, I think you have to try things. So you asked about the mentor. The reason I started that is not the reason probably anybody would think. I was reading the newspaper one morning, and I read that this company named Substack had raised, I think at the time, had raised like $40 million. And the article was like, yeah, it's like newsletters. And I was like, how is that even possible that a company raised $40 million for newsletters? I was like, I gotta know what this is. And so my instinct was just go sign up. So I went and signed up. And it's like, at the time when you signed up, it's like, what is your newsletter about? And so I was literally just making stuff up on the fly, which is what became the mentor. But it was because I was just curious to know how this company raised so much money for newsletters.
How much time would you say spend reading daily basis, weekly basis, if you could give a percentage?
Ooh, it's a lot. I mean, I get up early, I exercise, then I read hopefully for 2 or 3 hours if I can before the day starts. Doesn't
All
happen
before
every
9
day.
a.m.
Yes. Um, and then I try to carve out time each day to, like, within the day to do stuff. And then certainly if I'm traveling, if I'm on a plane, if I get too tired, I'll start watching stuff, but I'm normally reading. So I don't know. I feel like 30 to 40% of the time I'm reading something.
Primarily about your industry?
Wider than that. I think I'd get bored if I was just reading about that. But I like to read about, I mean, I love reading biographies. If I see a sports team that's successful, I'm like, all right, so what is that coach doing? Because they've been bad forever. Like, what are they doing? Like, that like really interests me. Or you see like a new chef that everybody's talking about. I'm like, all right, so like, we've been cooking food for years. So why is this chef so good? We're so interested. Like, that's the stuff I really like to read. And so it's not just about technology, although I read a good bit of that. It's more about like people that are successful, that have a unique interest. What are they doing? What's their technique? Why is that successful? Like, that is something that really interests me.
You've written many of books on AI transformation. You've written one more recently, but prior to that, you wrote the AI Ladder. I believe it published in 2020. What's changed in the 5 years since it published? What still holds companies back from scaling AI today?
Let me give you historical analogy. So 1880 is the first commercial application of electricity, which was the light bulb. And so the first main use of the light bulb was in manufacturing facilities, because manufacturing used to be literally gas lamp. So people would be around building stuff and they'd have to bring in oil, fill the lamps. And so all the lighting was from gas lamps. And so when the light bulb was invented, suddenly it took all that work out, and suddenly the working spaces were cleaner and it was brighter. And so productivity went up. So like, that was the light bulb moment for electricity. But the real impact was actually not for another 30 years, when electricity was used to put motors at every manufacturing station. And that's what led to the assembly line and then the production of the Model T. And so electricity went from an application of a light bulb, which was useful, to electric motors, which completely changed the world in manufacturing. Now, let's bring that to AI. I think we're still at the light bulb moment. And I'm amazed, like, when I saw in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago, was like, large bank now able to do email summaries. I'm like, really? Is this what we were promised with AI, which is like email summaries? So like, we're having AI draft emails and then it's creating a summary so somebody doesn't have to read it. I'm like, that doesn't seem like, it's no wonder you read some reports, whether it's McKinsey or MIT, they're like, hey, AI is not delivering an ROI. Like, if the application is email summaries, that's a light bulb. It's not going to change how business is done. But I'm starting to see evidence of the motor, which is AI is really changing how companies work. I think one of the best examples is in IBM. We said we're going to be the most productive company in the world. Since that time, by the end of this year, we will have generated $4.5 billion of productivity by automating things that used to be manual. And we started
For
with
instance,
basic repetitive tasks, things like employee verification, or how you look at salary planning and promotions, just augmenting what humans are doing. Supply chain. So procurement. Instead of everything being paper-based, it's just like basic automation and applying AI to make things run way more efficiently. And so the impact it's had on us is profound. And so the number one question I get now from clients is, can you do that for us? And that's because I think clients are seeing they're mainly at the light bulb moment and they're looking for something that looks more like a motor.
At IBM, would you say that you're currently at the motor stage, or are you closer to the motor stage than you'd say your competitors are, or even some of your clients are?
I think we've had the most ambitious evidence that we've moved well into the motor stage, meaning we've actually changed how we're operating the business. It's taken out a lot of cost. It's enabled us to people assume, hey, that's going to take a lot of jobs. It has displaced some jobs, but we've then hired people into R&D roles. So it's really been a shift in labor for us more than anything else. As I look around the world, I feel like we're probably a bit ahead of others, I would say, in terms of how we've transformed what we're doing. But I think others are starting to do this.
Many organizations claim to be AI first. What distinguishes the companies that are turning AI into that motor stage, into real business results, from those that are just experimenting or kind of treating it as a side hobby?
It is a cultural endeavor to be successful in AI. And if there's one thing I think people underestimate, but it also is what distinguishes the winners, it's willing to take on that cultural battle, I would say.
What do you mean by that?
I'll give you the most basic one. And I wrote something, I called it the 100% fallacy. And it's what I see every day in AI. The 100% fallacy is people say, all right, we're going to look at doing this with AI. It either has to be 100% accurate or it's going to be 100% human. I'm like, but hold on. Like, our humans are not very accurate. I mean, certainly not 100%. So why are we holding AI to a higher standard than we would even hold our humans? And so I think the reason I say it's a fallacy is if you're saying we're only going to use AI if it's 100% accurate and 100% successful, you've set a bar that no technology can get over. And so I think the cultural nuance is, can you live with the fact that it's not going to be perfect? But even when it's not perfect, it can still be better than manual processing or manual tasks. So number one is just, I'd say the cultural willingness to say it's not going to be perfect. Number two is, it is about reskilling your employees. And I talked about maybe we have less people in the back office today, but more in software engineering. I mean, that's a reskilling thing that has to happen.
I'm going to play maybe a little bit of devil's advocate, for lack of a better phrasing. Should the onus of upskilling, reskilling fall on the employer? Should it fall on the employees themselves to take that initiative?
I love that question because I often get questions from our employees like, hey, you should be training me. And I do respond in the way that your question implied. What I said, number one is, it's all of our own job to make sure our skills are evolving. Like, I can't imagine sitting around being like, please, everybody train me. Like, back to the point on drive, like, I was just always curious and I wanted to go do it. At the same time, I do think the employer plays a role in that because we want to be one of the most important companies in the world. We have to invest in our people to do that. For example, we've just started some new training programs around elevating our best technical talent, also building new general managers, so people that would manage large teams in IBM. So I do think we have that as a responsibility, but it's always both, because if individuals are just waiting for the company to do it, they're going to already be behind, is my view.
Segue to that, I'm curious to hear how you're using AI, certainly personally, but how do you also see AI reshaping leadership itself, especially the way executives make decisions or measure performance? Are you seeing any immediate changes in that regard, especially in the way you lead?
I think it should certainly change the velocity and how we work. And that's probably the way I'm trying to use it the most.
In terms of doing more?
Well, doing more personally, but also like when we're when I'm in product reviews, instead of asking people, what did clients say or how's the product being used? I'd rather look at the data that says this is how the product's being used. This is what all right, so we built a new product recently that's basically integrating different AI models. We choose the best model based on the task at hand, optimizing performance and cost. Instead of having somebody tell me whether they like it or not, I'd like to look at the data to say, are people using it? If they are using it, precisely how are they using it? Now, that's not necessarily all AI. That is as simple as just using data instead of opinion. But I think once you start to train yourself to ask those questions and look at the problem that way, it does massively increase your velocity because you're not spending time just chasing around opinions.
How do you use it in your personal life?
Research, like anything I'm doing now, like I like to cook, I have other hobbies, like I'll always start with that. What is the best way to do this? And it's great preparing for meetings with clients or even preparing speeches. I speak a good bit externally, and it used to be I would write everything myself. Now I can say, here's all the things I want to say. What's the best way to structure this? And, it still requires 30% editing, but it gives you a jump start. So I think it does save a lot of time.
Any apprehension that some of those skills that were innate to you will atrophy if you over rely on AI?
I think we have to be careful about people early in their career where they don't have the chance to learn some of the basics. Meaning, to my point on speech writing, I don't really have a speech writer. Like I like to write everything myself. I like to find my own stories, build my own narrative. Like if I didn't do that without AI, I think it'd be really hard to do it well with AI. You would look like a robot. Like it wouldn't be really very relatable. So I think you have to build a base of skills. I think before you want to start to augment too much. Otherwise, I don't think the augmentation will be good. I'll give you an example in our business. Like when we rolled out coding tools to developers, I think the initial instinct was, hey, this will make the average developers as good as the best developer. It's actually the opposite that happened. It made the 10x person way better, and it made the average person just a little better. And it kind of comes back to the point of if you don't have the foundation, then AI can't really help distinguish you. Might make you 5% better, but that's not enough.
Before we pivot, I just want to go back to this conversation around job displacement, especially for those who aren't within the tech sector. It can be nerve wracking to say the least. And I know that IBM, you said you're really leveraging AI. There has been job disruption. You're also hired in other roles. How do you, however, kind of lead through that disruption? Certainly with empathy, but also with realism about what is ahead for your people, what is ahead for your teams.
I I wrote a book back in 2016. It was called The End of Tech Companies. And the title is kind of a play on words. The point of the book is that I said every company is going to be a technology company. And so we better start thinking about what that means now as opposed to waiting until that moment comes. I do believe we're in that moment now. And regardless of who I speak to in any industry, healthcare, banking, insurance, manufacturing, I do hear everybody thinking of themselves as a technology company now. I think number one is just accepting that that's the reality. And I think there's probably pockets where maybe companies haven't accepted that. I think that's a problem. I think once you accept that is what your company is, it leads you down a different path of training and displacement and how jobs will change. I think it's pretty indelible in history that technology is good. Technology creates growth. To my point on the group that won the Nobel Prize, they did say it's disruptive. They did say it will be painful, but it drives growth, and growth is always good. And so I think people have to be comfortable with what you do day to day might change. That doesn't mean there's nothing for you to do, but it does mean that it might change. And I think those that kind of grip to this is how we've always done it, this is what I want to do, that's probably not going to feel very good at some stage to them.
Is growth always good?
Economic growth is definitely good. It's It's eradicated disease. It's created wealth in the world. It's not eliminated starvation, but it's certainly made a big dent in starvation. Um, so I think economic growth is actually very good.
What does success look like for IBM software business, let's say over the next 3 years and next 5 years? And what's the biggest lever you're pulling right now in order to get there?
We've changed a lot of what software is in IBM over the last few years. It's now nearly 50% of the company.
And what was the catalyst behind that?
We wanted IBM to grow faster because growth is everything in technology. Technology is really kind of a fashion business. Either you're growing and becoming more relevant or or the opposite is true. And so to me, we only had one path, which is we have to be at the front end of what's happening in technology and driving growth. Because of that, we started by saying, what are the things that we do today that we're not very good at? And we had acquired some companies through the year, things doing like healthcare applications, weather, and those were good businesses. Those were good decisions at the time, but they probably weren't going to help us in the future for what we wanted to be. So it was about getting back to what we do best. And what we do best, to be honest, is a little bit boring. We like to do all of the infrastructure that makes everything work, but that doesn't mean we don't have a consumer business, so we don't really have a front end. So people don't see a lot of what we do. We're about how do you run your operations more efficiently? How do you use more AI? How do you better use your data? If you want to run your technology across multiple clouds, we help make that very easy. Most people don't see this stuff, but it is I would call it the nervous system of the economy. We still, to this day, we process over 90% of the credit card transactions in the world. Nobody ever knows it's IBM. Nobody ever sees it. So we're really the nervous system of what happens. And so the decision was really about let's become better at that. We know what we're really good at. The opportunity in front of us is everybody knows the name IBM. Not everybody knows what IBM is today. And we can see that in the data of our clients. The top 2,000 clients around the world, if you look at, Fortune 2,000, they know IBM, they use IBM. But that's only half of the market for technology. And so we have to introduce ourselves to the other half of the market, which is another 50,000 companies. That's probably the single biggest growth opportunity for us is how do we introduce IBM to them, show them that we have products that are relevant to them, important to them. We have a consulting business that has great skills that can help companies of any size. That's really the big growth opportunity for us.
Let's just do a quick speed round. If you would, I'd love to just personal reflection, your legacy. After 2 decades at IBM, what's the single biggest leadership lesson you've learned about reinvention and about staying relevant?
It's an everyday thing, meaning every day I have to commit myself to learn more, to read more, to try new things. And if everybody in IBM does that at scale, the company will constantly be relevant and will be one of the most important companies in the world.
You said you're an avid reader. Share what you're currently reading or a book you've read that really changed your approach to business, to leadership, to corporate management.
One that I read it relatively early in my career that I think kind of guided a lot for me was a book called Life is Not a Game of Perfect. It's written by a sports psychologist, actually. So it has very little to do with business, but there's some business stories in it. And the whole premise of the book is that you're never going to be perfect, but you have to have a process. You got to be consistent in what you're doing to build your own skills or to be successful in the role. There's a lot of examples in the book about focus on the process, not the outcome. A lot of people say that now. I think the author was actually very early talking about this. Like that's really stuck with me because I see it almost everything I do in every aspect of our business. If you have a process and an approach and you are consistent, you're going to be successful.
You run one of the largest divisions at IBM, not only one of the largest, but one of the divisions that's hugely critical to the future of IBM. How do you stay connected to people who are several layers below you, as we discussed at the top of this conversation, to make sure they really feel seen and heard, but to also ensure that you know what's going on across all the various levels and channels of the org?
There's a few different ways. Monthly, I do an Ask Me Anything on Slack, where literally in like a half hour, hopefully I plow through like 80 to 100 questions. And it is amazing how much signal you get out of doing something like that. Because if you hear the same thing a few times, it's like, all right, that's not just somebody complaining. There's actually a problem. So that's one way to do it. That's kind of one to many. Another way is somebody suggested this to me a long time ago, and I started doing it. They said, create a council or a forum where you can hear from people without their bosses there. So I started doing this a few years ago, where I just would meet with individuals, non-managers, kind of in a round table. And you do that consistently for a while, people get comfortable with you, and then they're willing to share anything. And you can learn a lot doing that. And then I started doing one with the managers, and those are separate. And so what you hear from the individuals is dramatically different than what you hear from the managers. And it's good in both. So I think those are some techniques that you can use to try to get a lens of what's actually happening, because I know that a lot of what comes to me has some filter on it. And I think it's really important to get the truth from where the action is.
Yeah. And you might very well already be doing this, but I think that's another area where AI could be additive. Pulling out the responses, asking it to pull out, okay, what are the 5 problem areas or challenges? What are you hearing the most of? And kind of zooming in there.
It's a great way to use technology to go after this.
All right. Well, don't say Fortune never helped you. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. It's really such a pleasure and a robust conversation.
Great to be with you.